All right, get ready to dive deep, really deep, into the inner workings of your brain.
Oh, this is going to be
We're
fun.
taking on Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
A classic.
It is, but
And dense.
yeah, our listeners have been making their way through excerpts and summaries.
Which is impressive, honestly, because it's a real thinker.
Exactly. So this deep dive, it's going to help connect the dots.
Makes sense of it all.
So are you ready to uncover the hidden forces that are like secretly shaping your choices every day?
Let's unravel those mysteries.
Okay, so Kahneman's big idea, the foundation of it all, is that we've got these two systems of thinking. He calls them, creatively, System 1 and System 2.
Catchy, right.
And they're constantly at work, like a little team in your head. Sometimes,
More like a tug of war.
yeah, battling it out for control. Think of System 1 as your brain's autopilot. It's like,
The quick, intuitive part of your thinking. The one that jumps into action without you even realizing it.
right, so like recognizing a face.
Or slamming on the brakes to avoid an accident.
It's all about speed
Mhm.
and efficiency. Relies on mental shortcuts.
Heuristics.
Right, heuristics. So that gut feeling, when you just make a snap judgment without overthinking it, that's System 1.
Exactly. It's fast, it's efficient. But those heuristics,
The shortcuts.
they can lead us astray. Predictable errors, even.
Like when I saw that fancy bottle of wine and just assumed it was better because it was more expensive.
Classic example. Our brains love to equate higher prices with higher quality,
Even if it's not true.
even if it's not true. It's System 1's love for simplicity and ease. Cognitive ease, as Kahneman calls it.
Got it. So it's not always about logic. More like feeling good.
In a way, yes. It's efficient, it's familiar, feels safe.
Okay, I see. So where does System 2 come in? This is the more.
Deliberate analytical part of you?
Right.
This is the one that steps in when you're tackling a complex problem,
Okay.
like analyzing a job offer
Right.
or meticulously planning a project.
Ah, so System 2 is the one who actually reads all the fine print.
Yes, but there's a catch. System 2, well, it can be a bit lazy.
Oh. I relate to that.
It takes effort, concentration. And our brains, well, they're wired to conserve energy.
Uh-huh. So that's why I procrastinate.
It's definitely a factor. It's easier to let System 1 take over, even when we know we should be,
More thoughtful.
precisely. Kahneman calls this the lazy controller phenomena.
Lazy controller, I like that. But that's when those biases, those mental traps, can really sneak in, right?
Exactly. When System 1 takes those shortcuts and System 2 is, well, snoozing.
Okay, let's break this down. What exactly do we mean by biases? This is like a key term here.
Think of them as mental shortcuts, ingrained patterns in our thinking.
Shortcuts that can lead us in the wrong direction.
Sometimes, yes, they can be efficient, but they can also lead to systematic errors in our judgment. And we all have them. It's just part of being human.
But why? Why would our brains evolve to have these shortcuts if they can trip us up? It seems counterintuitive.
Well, imagine our ancestors facing danger in the wild. They needed to make quick decisions, often based on limited information.
So like a life or death situation.
Exactly. These mental shortcuts, they help them survive. But in today's world, where decisions are often more complex, these same shortcuts can backfire.
So it's like our brains haven't quite caught up to the modern world.
In a way, yes. That's why it's so crucial to understand these biases, to become aware of them.
So we can outsmart our own brains.
Precisely. Let's start with one that I think everyone can relate to, the availability heuristic.
Ooh, that sounds intense. Like, should I be wearing a helmet for this?
Uh-huh. Not quite, but it can definitely lead to some irrational fears.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
The availability heuristic, it's all about how easily we can recall examples of something. The easier it is to bring those examples to mind.
The more likely we think it is to happen.
Exactly. Like, if you just watch Jaws, you're probably going to be more afraid of sharks, even though...
Statistically, it's incredibly unlikely that I'll encounter a shark.
Exactly. Our brains latch on to those vivid, dramatic events because they're readily available in our memory. Media plays a huge role in this.
Right, so it's not always about facts and logic, but more about how easily we can remember something. That's fascinating.
And potentially misleading, but once you understand the availability heuristic, you can start to question those knee-jerk reactions.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, what about something like the optimism bias? I have a feeling I might be prone to this one.
Oh, we all are, to some extent. It's part of what makes us human.
So tell me, what is it exactly?
It's our tendency to overestimate our abilities and downplay risks, especially when we're excited about something.
Ooh, yeah. I've definitely been there. Like when I thought I could learn to speak Italian fluently in like a month.
Uh-huh. Ambitious.
Let's just say my trip to Rome was a bit more challenging than I anticipated.
That's a classic example of the optimism bias in action.
So little optimism is good, right? It
Mhm.
drives us, it helps us set goals.
Absolutely. It's a powerful motivator. But too much optimism can lead to unrealistic expectations and sometimes poor decisions.
So how do we strike that balance? How do we harness the power of optimism without, letting it lead us astray?
It's about being aware of this bias, especially when you're making important decisions. Challenge your assumptions.
Don't just assume everything's going to go perfectly.
Exactly. Seek feedback from others, get different perspectives, and maybe most importantly, have a backup plan just in case things don't go as well as optimistically as you hoped.
So don't bet the farm on that one. Super optimistic outcome.
Wise words.
Okay, got it. Don't let the excitement cloud my judgment.
Now, let's talk about another bias that you might relate to, especially given your efforts to tackle this rather dense book, the planning fallacy.
Okay, I'm all ears. This sounds like something I need to know about.
It's a tendency we all have to underestimate how long things will take and how much it will cost, even when we have, evidence to the contrary.
Wait a minute. Are you spying on my DIY projects? Because this sounds painfully familiar.
Haha, no spying necessary. It's a universal human experience. We get so focused on the ideal scenario, that perfect plan in our heads.
Right, the vision.
Exactly. And we underestimate the potential for delays, unexpected costs, life happening.
So like when I thought I could renovate my bathroom in a weekend,
Oh, I've been there.
it took 3 weeks and cost twice as much as I budgeted.
Classic planning fallacy.
Okay, so how do I avoid falling into this trap again? Because I have a feeling I'm going to be doing more DIY projects in the future.
One strategy is to break down projects into smaller tasks and then estimate the time for each one realistically. Not ideally, but realistically.
Okay, so smaller chunks. Got it.
And look back at past projects, yours and others. Get a more accurate sense of timelines and budgets. Data is your friend here.
So basically, learn from my mistakes and maybe pad those estimates a little bit.
Exactly. A little padding goes a long way.
Okay, I can do that. Now, we've talked about the availability heuristic, the optimism bias, the planning fallacy. What's next?
Let's move on to another fascinating concept, the illusion of understanding.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's this illusion all about?
It's our tendency to oversimplify complex systems and believe we know more than we actually do. We create these neat narratives in our minds.
So we like to make things simple, even when they're not.
Exactly. We crave that sense of order, of understanding. But in doing so, we often ignore the nuances, the uncertainties, the messiness of reality.
So, like, when I think I understand the stock market after watching, like, one YouTube video.
A perfect example. We often mistake familiarity for understanding. Just because we can explain something in simple terms doesn't mean we truly grasp the complexity of it.
So how do we avoid falling prey to this illusion? How do we embrace the complexity?
Humility is key. Acknowledge the limits of your knowledge. Be open to different perspectives. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know.
So it's okay to not have all the answers.
More than okay. It's essential. Embracing uncertainty, that's where true learning begins.
This is all so insightful. But I have to admit, it's a bit daunting to think about all these biases, these mental traps lurking in my mind. It's like, I don't even trust my own brain anymore.
It can feel that way at first. But remember, awareness is the first step. Just by knowing about these biases, you're already ahead of the game. You're starting to see the world and yourself with a new level of clarity.
So it's like, knowledge is power.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. Now, let's delve into another bias that can significantly impact our choices. Loss aversion.
Okay, loss aversion. Lay it on me. What's this one all about?
It describes how the pain of losing something, anything, is psychologically twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
Whoa, really? Twice as powerful.
Think about it. Imagine winning $100. Feels good, right?
Yeah.
Now imagine losing $100.
Not so much.
The pain of that loss, it looms larger in our minds than the joy of the win, even though rationally they're equivalent.
So even if the potential reward is significant, our brains are more fixated on what we could lose.
Exactly. It's deeply rooted in our evolutionary past. For our ancestors, losing resources could have meant, well, not surviving.
Right, so it's a matter of life and death. But in today's world, it can hold us back, make us hesitant to take risks, even calculated ones.
You're getting it. It explains why so many people struggle with things like investing. The fear of losing money often outweighs the potential for gains.
Okay, so how do we overcome this fear? Do we just ignore our feelings, dive headfirst into risky ventures?
Not necessarily. It's about finding a healthy balance. One strategy is to reframe your thinking.
Reframe, like literally change the way I'm looking at it.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on what you could lose, try to focus on the potential gains.
Right.
What could you achieve if you take this risk?
So with investing, instead of dwelling on, the possibility of losing money, I should shift my focus to the potential profits.
Exactly. It's about changing the narrative in your head.
That makes a lot of sense. But what if I'm just like naturally risk averse?
Well, another helpful strategy is to diversify your risks. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Okay, so spread out the risk.
Spread it out, whether it's investments, business ventures, even personal goals. If you diversify, even if one thing doesn't work out,
You haven't lost everything.
exactly. And remember, losses are an inevitable part of life, especially when you're stretching yourself, taking risks.
So it's not about avoiding loss altogether.
It's about learning from those losses and moving forward.
This is all so insightful. I'm starting to feel like I can actually outsmart my own brain, like, taking control.
That's the goal. Now, let's explore another bias that plays a significant role in our decision making, the framing effect.
Okay, I'm ready for another mind-blowing revelation. What's the framing effect all about?
It highlights how the way information is presented, the way it's framed, can significantly influence our choices.
So even if the underlying facts are the same,
Even if the facts are the same, the way it's presented can totally change our perception.
oh, I've definitely fallen for this one before. Like when I buy something just because it's advertised as like 50% off,
Yeah.
even though I don't really need it.
Classic example. We're more likely to choose an option presented as a gain, even if it's mathematically equivalent to an option presented as a loss.
So like losing 50% is the same as not gaining 50%, but it feels different.
Exactly. Our brains are wired to avoid losses, so we're drawn to those positive frames, those gain scenarios, even if it's just a manipulation of language.
So marketers and advertisers, they're basically masters of the framing effect.
You could say that. They understand the psychology behind it. They know how to highlight the positive and downplay the negative to influence our behavior.
Feels a bit manipulative, honestly.
It can be. That's why awareness is so important.
Okay, so how do I protect myself from these framing tricks? How do I make sure I'm making decisions based on, actual value, not just clever wording?
First, just be aware that the presentation of information isn't always neutral. There's often an agenda behind it, especially in marketing and advertising.
Right, so be skeptical.
Exactly. Then try to reframe the information yourself. Look at it from different angles. Consider both the positive and the negative aspects of each option.
So don't let those marketing wizards hypnotize me with their, fancy words.
Exactly. Focus on the underlying facts. Do the math. Make sure your decisions are based on your own assessment of value, not just the way something is presented.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. This deep dive has been it's been eye-opening. I'm starting to see these biases everywhere now.
That's the power of understanding these cognitive shortcuts. It's like you're seeing the matrix.
The Matrix, I love it. But I think our listener's brain might need a little break to process all this. We've covered a lot of ground today.
Good point. Let's take a pause here and come back for part 2 of our deep dive into thinking fast and slow.
Welcome back. Ready for round 2 of our deep dive into thinking fast and slow.
Let's keep those brains firing.
I'm feeling like I'm already starting to, catch myself making those snap judgments.
That's the first step. Awareness is key. Once you start to recognize those biases, those patterns in your thinking, you can start to question them.
Exactly. So where do we go from here? What other fascinating biases has Kahneman uncovered?
Let's talk about the concept of priming.
Priming. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's the idea that exposure to certain stimuli, certain words, images, sounds, even smells, can influence our subsequent thoughts and behaviors.
Wait, so just seeing or hearing something can subtly sway my actions, even if I'm not consciously aware of it?
Exactly. It's like setting the stage for your brain. Kahneman describes a fascinating study where people were exposed to words related to old age, wrinkles, gray hair, that sort of thing. And guess what?
What?
They actually walked slower afterward.
Whoa, that's wild. So just thinking about certain concepts can have a real physical effect on us.
Absolutely. It highlights the power of subconscious influences, how our environment can shape our perceptions and actions in ways we don't even realize.
Okay, so how does this apply to decision making? Can priming actually affect our choices?
Imagine you're bombarded with ads for luxury cars, those sleek, stylish images, the promise of status and comfort. You might start feeling dissatisfied with your current car, even if it's perfectly functional.
So marketers are using priming to make us crave things we don't even need. That's a bit sneaky, isn't it?
Well, they're tapping into the power of association. They want you to connect their product with positive emotions, with aspirational lifestyles.
It makes sense, but it's still a bit unsettling. Like, I feel like I need to be more vigilant about the messages I'm exposed to. How can I protect myself from being, manipulated by priming?
As always, awareness is the first step. Pay attention to the messages you're absorbing, whether it's through advertising, social media, or even casual conversations. Question those automatic associations your brain is making.
So it's about being a more conscious consumer of information, not just passively taking it all in.
Precisely. Make sure your decisions are based on your own needs and priorities, not external influences.
Okay, I'm ready to start questioning everything. What else should I be on the lookout for?
Well, let's talk about cognitive ease. This refers to the feeling of fluency and familiarity we experience when we're processing information.
Cognitive ease. So it's like, if it feels easy to understand, it must be true.
Not necessarily. Our brains love cognitive ease. It feels good. It feels safe. But it can lead us to believe something is true simply because it's easy to understand or recall.
Wait, so just because I've heard something over and over again, like a slogan or a catchphrase, it doesn't make it true.
Exactly. Repetition can create a false sense of truth. Always be critical of information, even if it feels familiar. Look for evidence. Question your sources.
Okay, so how do I avoid falling into this trap? Should I just be, like, suspicious of everything I hear?
Not necessarily suspicious, but definitely discerning. Think yourself as a detective. Look for clues, weigh the evidence, and don't be afraid to change your mind when presented with new information.
So basically, don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, even if it feels easy to just go with the flow.
Precisely. Cognitive ease can be a sign that we're on autopilot, letting System 1 call the shots. Engage System 2. Ask tough questions. Don't settle for easy answers.
This is making me think about my own decision-making process. Do you think we can, like, train ourselves to be less reliant on System 1 and engage System 2 more often? Like, can we actually strengthen those analytical muscles?
Absolutely. It's like working out any other muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes.
Okay, that's encouraging. What are some practical strategies for, flexing those System 2 muscles?
One helpful technique is to slow down your thinking. Don't jump to conclusions. Pause. Consider different perspectives. Weigh the evidence carefully.
So it's about hitting the pause button on that autopilot mode.
Exactly. Another strategy is to challenge your assumptions. Don't take anything for granted, even if it feels familiar or comfortable. Ask yourself, why do I believe this? What evidence supports this?
So basically, become my own inner skeptic.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to seek out diverse viewpoints. Surround yourself with people who challenge your thinking. Read material that presents different perspectives. This helps break you out of your echo chamber and see things from multiple angles.
It sounds like stepping outside my comfort zone can actually lead to better decision-making.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears and explore a concept that has a huge impact on how we perceive value and make choices. Prospect theory.
Okay, prospect theory. Lay it on me. What's so special about this theory?
Prospect theory describes how we make decisions when faced with risk and uncertainty. Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky, they did some groundbreaking research in this area.
Okay, so tell me, what did they discover?
They discovered that people don't always behave rationally when assessing potential gains and losses.
Wait, so we're not always rational, but I thought that was the whole point of System 2, to help us think logically.
That's the ideal, yes. But even with System 2 engaged, our emotions can still play a role. Prospect theory highlights a few key insights about how we actually behave, not just how we think we should behave.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear about these irrational tendencies.
One key finding is that we're more sensitive to losses than to gains. Remember loss aversion.
Yeah, the pain of losing is stronger than the pleasure of winning.
Exactly. Well, prospect theory expands on this idea. It shows that the pain of a loss looms larger in our minds than the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
So even if I win $100 and then lose $100, the feeling of that loss will outweigh the initial joy of winning, even though it's a wash financially.
Exactly. That's why we often make decisions based on avoiding losses rather than maximizing gains.
This is starting to make me rethink my entire approach to investing. I've been so focused on avoiding losses that I've probably missed out on some great opportunities.
That's a common struggle. We're wired to protect ourselves from those potential losses, even if it means sacrificing potential gains.
So how do we overcome this fear of loss? Should I just like ignore my feelings and dive headfirst into risky ventures?
Not necessarily. It's about finding that balance, that sweet spot between caution and calculated risk. One strategy, again, is to reframe your thinking. Instead of focusing on what you could lose, try to focus on the potential gains.
So instead of dwelling on the possibility of losing money in an investment, I should shift my focus to, the potential profits,
Yeah.
the long-term growth.
Exactly. Shifting your perspective can help reduce the emotional impact of that potential loss.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if I'm just like wired to be risk averse? What if I'm just naturally cautious?
Well, another helpful strategy is to diversify your risks. Spread those investments out. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. That way, even if one thing doesn't work out, you haven't lost everything.
So don't bet the farm on any single venture.
Exactly. Spread those bets, spread those risks. And remember, losses are an inevitable part of life, especially in areas like investing. The key is to learn from them and move forward.
This is all so insightful. I'm starting to feel like I can actually outsmart my own brain. Like I'm not just a slave to these biases anymore.
That's the power of understanding these concepts. It's about taking control of your decision-making process, not letting your emotions run the show.
Now let's move on to another fascinating aspect of Kahneman's work, the endowment effect.
Ah, yes, the endowment effect. This one's all about ownership.
Ownership. Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more.
It describes our tendency to value something more highly simply because we own it. We become attached to our possessions.
Oh, this is so me. I have the hardest time getting rid of things, even if I haven't used them in years. Like there's this box of old clothes in my closet.
We've all got that box or drawer or attic. It's a common human tendency. We form these emotional attachments to things, even if those attachments aren't based on, any rational criteria.
So just because I own something, I automatically think it's more valuable, even if it's like objectively not worth that much.
It's not always rational, no. Kahneman did a classic study with mugs, gave participants a mug, and then offered them the chance to sell it.
Okay, and
People demanded significantly more to sell the mug than they were willing to pay for it initially. Just because they owned it, it suddenly became more valuable in their eyes.
so ownership creates this like emotional bias.
Exactly. It's like we imbue our possessions with a part of ourselves.
I can see how this could apply to like bigger things too, like selling a house or a car. It's not just about the market value. It's about the memories, the experiences we've attached to those possessions.
Exactly. The endowment effect highlights how our emotions, our sense of ownership, can cloud our judgment when we're assessing value.
Okay, this is all incredibly fascinating. But I have to admit, it's also a bit overwhelming to think about all these biases, these irrational tendencies at play. It's like, I don't even know if I can trust my own brain anymore.
It can feel that way at first. But remember, the goal isn't to become perfectly rational beings. That's not realistic. We're all human, and these biases, they're part of what makes us who we are.
So it's about embracing our flawed humanness
Yeah.
while also striving to be, better thinkers.
Exactly. The key is to use this knowledge, to recognize these biases, and to understand how they might influence our choices. It's about working with our brains, not against them.
This deep dive has been incredible. But I think we might need another break to let all this information sink in. What do you say we continue this exploration in our final segment?
Sounds like a plan. Let's take a pause and come back for our final round of insights from Thinking Fast and Slow.
Welcome back to our final deep dive into Thinking Fast and Slow. I feel like we've covered so much ground already. It's amazing how much Kahneman packed into this book.
It really is a treasure trove of insights into the human mind, and we've still got a few more gems to uncover.
Okay, I'm ready for more. Hit me with those final brain-bending revelations.
Let's talk about the concept of mental accounting. It's all about how we tend to categorize our money, even though,
Money is money, right?
right, it's all fungible, meaning interchangeable, but we don't treat it that way.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Kahneman argues that we create these mental accounts, these separate compartments, for different purposes.
Like what?
Entertainment, savings, vacation funds, you name it.
Ah, so it's like I feel guilty spending money from my savings account.
But you have no problem blowing your fun money budget on a spontaneous weekend trip.
Exactly, even though, rationally, it's all the same money.
But our brains don't see it that way. We create these psychological barriers, these rules around how we can spend certain money.
So my brain is playing tricks on me again.
In a way, yes. It's a way of simplifying our financial decisions, making us feel more in control. But it can lead to some irrational choices.
Like when I refuse to touch my savings to pay off a high-interest credit card debt.
That's a classic example. We become so fixated on maintaining those mental accounts.
That we miss opportunities to make smarter financial moves.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do I break free from this mental accounting trap?
One strategy is to try and view your money more holistically. Remember, it's all fungible. Ask yourself, what's the most financially sound decision, regardless of which mental account the money comes from?
So look at the big picture, not those arbitrary categories I've created in my mind.
Precisely. It's also helpful to set clear financial goals, maybe with a financial advisor, and then create a budget that aligns with those goals.
Makes sense. Okay, I'm taking notes. Now, before we wrap up, there's one last bias I want to talk about. I think it's super relevant in today's world with all the advertising and marketing messages we're bombarded with every day.
I bet I know which one you're thinking of. The anchoring bias.
That's the one. Tell me more.
It describes our tendency to be overly influenced by the first piece of information we receive, even if it's irrelevant or arbitrary.
So, like, if I see a ridiculously expensive pair of shoes, and suddenly all the other shoes seem reasonably priced in comparison,
That's a perfect example. That initial price, the anchor, skewed your perception of value.
this is starting to feel a bit manipulative. Are businesses using this anchoring bias to, like, trick us into spending more?
It's definitely a tactic used in pricing and negotiations. A car salesman might start by showing you the top-of-the-line model.
Setting a high anchor.
Exactly.
Right.
Then they present you with a more affordable option.
That suddenly seems like a steal.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we avoid falling prey to these anchoring tactics? It feels like we're being manipulated.
Awareness is key. Be aware of the power of first impressions. Don't take that initial information at face value, especially when it comes to prices.
So do my own research.
Yes, compare prices, shop around, and don't let that initial anchor, that first impression, cloud your judgment.
Got it. Don't let those salespeople set the terms of the game.
Exactly. Be an active participant in the process. Make informed decisions based on your own assessment of value.
Wow. This deep dive has been incredible. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of my own mind.
Yeah. Me too. And the invisible forces that shape our choices.
It's a little humbling, honestly, to realize how much our brains are working behind the scenes.
It is. But it's also empowering.
How so?
Because now we know about these biases, we can start to recognize them, question them, and make more conscious choices.
So we're not just slaves to our automatic reactions anymore.
Exactly. We can choose to slow down, engage our system too, and make decisions that are more aligned with our true goals and values.
Well said. And to our amazing listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into thinking fast and slow. We've covered a lot of ground, from the two systems of thinking to all those fascinating biases that shape our choices.
We've explored loss aversion and framing effects, priming and anchoring, and so much more.
And hopefully this deep dive has left you with not just a bunch of new knowledge, but a whole new way of looking at the world and at yourself.
Remember, awareness is the first step. And now that you're aware of these biases, you can start to notice them in your own life, in the media, in the way decisions are made all around you.
So keep those brains engaged. Question your assumptions, challenge the status quo, and don't be afraid to slow down your thinking.
And who knows, maybe you'll discover some of your own mental shortcuts along the way.
That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those brains firing.